Hey guys, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat and I am your host, and I am so excited to welcome you back to another episode on the channel, whether you are watching on YouTube, hi, whether you are watching on Spotify, hi. If you're listening on Apple, thank you so much for being here. I am really grateful to be here on another week. I'm recording this 2 weeks ahead of when it's supposed to come out because, like I said, it was this really big moment. It's like an aha moment of like, this is what I need to talk about. And so, yeah, there's really not a lot to update in my personal life other than continuing to heal SIBO. I'm back from Kauai. I am heading out of town again next week for a staycation with my boyfriend and the dogs. We're heading up to the mountains in Colorado for a few days. And then we come back and then it's like summer. And all of my courtyard patio furniture gets here next week, which I'm so excited about because that means that it's finally time to enjoy the sunshine and I can sit outside and read my book and just be more in nature and not be in the house all the time. I'm so excited. I can't even wait. If you follow me on Instagram, you're literally going to get so much obnoxious content about me on my freaking patio. But what inspired this week's episode is actually some content I was putting out this week on this week's episode. If you're listening to this now, this is 2 weeks ago. It's episode 48, and it's all about my trip to Kauai, my past life and future life journey that I'm on, and reading all of Dr. Brian Weiss's books. I'm reading Only Love is Real right now, and it's so freaking good. I literally cannot put his books down. I, in fact, purchased all of his books, and I'm currently getting through all of them. But in that episode, number 48, I talk about the difference between empathy and compassion, and I tie that into a lot of things that I'm learning from his books. And the content about empathy and compassion was like really well received on social media. And a few people reached out to me on TikTok and some on Instagram and said, can you please expand on this? I've never known the difference. And to be honest, I really never knew the difference of it either until maybe like I read this book a couple of weeks ago. I thought empathy and compassion were always the same thing. And I would always get the two confused. And then I read this passage in this book, which I'm going to actually read for you today. I want you to hear Dr. Brian Weiss's words very clearly on what he deems the difference to be. I think for many of us, we think that they're the same thing. Like, oh, I'm a very empathetic person. I can feel a lot. And it's like, yes, part of empathy is like feeling there. I'm not going to say that it's not, but once I read this passage to you and I share with you kind of all the downloads I've been getting around empathy and compassion, and especially how it ties in with our families, you're going to understand that like empathy is way more intellectual than it is about feeling. Feelings obviously come as a byproduct of the things that we think about, but compassion is much more instinctual. It's more in the body. And so I found just in reading this book and doing my own thinking and being open to more compassionate and empathetic wisdom coming through, the things that I've kind of discovered about how people use empathy and compassion tells us a lot about their childhood trauma. I know a lot of people, including myself, are like, oh, I'm a very empathetic person because of my childhood. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get that. And also when I read you this passage, you're going to be like, wait a second. Okay, this is actually shifting my perspective on what I actually took in from my childhood and how it's still kind of following me into my adulthood. And there's nothing wrong with empathy. Like there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. Being an empathetic person is a very understanding person. Too much empathy and you will fall somewhere on the spectrum of like overanalyzation. Too much compassion and maybe there's not a lot of room for discernment. So we kind of have to like look at our relationship with balancing between empathy and compassion. And if this sounds like mumbo jumbo and you're not really sure what the heck I'm saying, it'll make more sense as we get into it. But that's where really the inspiration from this week's episode came from, was people wanting to know, oh my God, I thought these were the same thing. How are they different? In the book, Same Soul, Many Bodies, which is what I'm going to read an excerpt from today, Dr. Brian Weiss is hypnotizing people to connect with their future selves so that they can then connect themes from past lives, present life into the future self so they can make different choices and decisions for their lives. Again, I get into this deeply in episode number 48. So if you're like, ooh, that raises a curious flag for me, go back and listen to that episode. And I have all of the chapters and the timestamps in the show notes. So you can literally go to that part of the episode and just listen to that part if nothing else interests you. But in Same Soul, Many Bodies, we're really talking a lot about our relationship dynamics. In the book, Same Soul, Many Bodies, Dr. Brian Weiss is talking about all of the different relationship dynamics that we can have with people in our lives and how it affects the lessons that we're supposed to learn. In the book, he says that there is something about having an empathetic experience that can largely shift someone's life path or someone's intention around their lives. So I'm going to read you just a little excerpt from chapter 5 of Same Soul, Many Bodies. The title of the chapter is called Hugh and Chitra, Compassion. Empathy and compassion are often used synonymously, but they are really two different elements in the human psyche. True, when you understand another's feelings as your own and are able to put yourself in his or her place, you will almost surely become compassionate toward that person. But you can also be compassionate without empathy. You can feel compassion for someone or even an insect or animal, even if you don't recognize the other's feelings in yourself. In Buddhist teaching, you are instructed to be compassionate towards animals and insects because all living creatures have souls. Indeed, they may have been humans in their past lives and may be humans again. He says, I don't find this in my work, but it doesn't mean the concept isn't true. It may simply be that humans don't remember lifetimes as different species. Thus, you can be compassionate toward a beetle or a bear without empathizing with it, without putting yourself in the insect's or animal's place. Compassion comes from the heart, and it is illustrated by being kind and benevolent to all living beings. Christ was supremely compassionate. By all accounts, so was Mohandas Gandhi. When your heart goes out to someone, you are being compassionate. The random acts of kindness that many speak about, letting someone go ahead of you in a checkout line, relinquishing your subway seat to a pregnant woman, giving food to the homeless, are all examples of compassionate behavior. But only if they come from a genuine impulse to be kind and not because you are quote unquote doing the right thing. Or expect brownie points in heaven. Compassion is more instinctual. Empathy is more intellectual. They come from different places. If you do the dialogue with illness exercise described in chapter 3, which is all about changing places with our emotions and things, and change places with, say, your abusive father, you don't necessarily have to be compassionate towards him. You may realize, wow, my father's father did the same thing to him that he's doing to me. And he took the cruel things he learned from his father and his culture and from his peers and transmitted them undigested to me. I empathize with what he felt because I understand those feelings. And I'm going to break the transmission of negative behavior because of what I learned. That is an intellectual exercise. However, ideally, and even in as extreme a case as an abusive father, as you empathize with your father, you can begin to feel compassion for him. This may be difficult. As you have compassion for him, he may be just as cruel to you as he was before. But he is an injured human being like yourself. And that realization might allow you a heartfelt response as well as an intellectual one. If you do respond, if you can see beyond your injuries, you'll find that as empathy and compassion merge, they lead you toward the final destination of all the lessons on the route to immortality. Spiritual love, unconditional love, love that is pure and everlasting. I just love that. I had goosebumps reading it the whole time. It really challenges the current societal narrative that we have when we're healing with our families. And I say this in every podcast episode that I do and every podcast episode that I'm on. You can still have empathy and compassion for your family members and not have a relationship with them. Your desire to be close emotionally or physically to your family is your choice, especially if the relationship is harmful in any way. But you can still cultivate empathy and compassion, love, warmth, understanding in a deeper, heart-centered way for your family members. And that is something I have deeply had to do healing the mother wound. It's like honoring the space that I need, but also realizing that I deeply love and feel empathy and compassion for my mother. And also navigating, when am I ready to have a conversation around this? And when am I also ready to be close again? And if I'm close again, how close do I really want to be? It's this really interesting push and pull that we go through where we're battling sometimes our boundaries, our ego, our heart, and our desires all at the same time. In a recent family constellation therapy I did with a client, we were working on this exact topic, empathy and compassion. And the client said to me, I feel everything so deeply and it feels like a curse. We kind of got to talking about what it looked like and how it was showing up with her. I started realizing that so many of my clients have told me without telling me that they feel things deeply. They say it in a different way. And I really resonate with this. I kind of went on this mind journey on people who feel things deeply. And what I discovered for myself, and what I discovered that is potentially true for a lot of people, is that feeling things deeply is just an indication that you have a deep longing for connection with others. And when you feel things so deeply and you call that empathy, what I believe is that as a child, you longed so deeply for connection, but you weren't getting it. So your brain started to analyze your environment to make sense of it, to feel safe so that you didn't feel depressed as a child or feel rejected as a child or abandoned as a child. And so if you're very empathetic, look at all of the ways that you tried to make sense of your environment intellectually in your mind, and where you were disconnected from compassionate connection with others. I think there's something so powerful about an empathetic experience, though. Being able to deeply understand and analyze and intellectualize your environment and other people, I think that's an emotionally mature skill that a lot of people lack, because a lot of people are willing to just jump to criticism and judgment. But the power of an empathetic experience, especially with the example he put in the book about the abusive father, is like really taking a step back and saying, this is what happened to him, and I'm seeing a pattern here, and I'm really realizing that none of this has to do with me. And that whole thought right there is literally family constellation therapy. It's literally realizing I'm a part of something that I don't need to be a part of. It was never about me. Everyone's just passing their pain down, and here I am carrying it unconsciously, and it's showing up in my relationships or in my choices or in addiction or in the way that I talk about my body, like whatever it is. The power of an empathetic experience is literally saying, I deeply understand my environment. I deeply understand other people. That's an empathetic experience. Feeling things deeply with that deep longing in connection for others is more of an attempt to consciously like merge with another person's experience to make up for the lack of connection you felt in childhood with your parents, which ultimately led you to feeling disconnected with yourself. Like, has anyone ever seen that like funny Instagram reels where the girl like climbs into her boyfriend's shirt and they're like, I just want to be closer? That is feeling things deeply as an indication that you missed out on connection when you were a child. Because you learned that that disconnect was part of the human experience. You got used to basically feeling disconnected all the time. You started disconnecting from yourself, because that's how we literally learn how to love ourselves, speak to ourselves, care for ourselves through the way that our parents teach us, through how they connect with us, how they care for us, how they take care of us. So if we learn that disconnect is the way to do it, then we're going to disconnect from ourselves. We're going to disconnect from others. So of course you feel things deeply, because you're literally holding the imbalance of, I really want connection, but I don't know how to have it. And you're literally just searching for it in all of these interesting ways. As an adult, you're faced with that all the time where nothing ever feels like enough, or you feel anytime that you have like deep connection, you're like wanting more and more and more. But it's like not every situation warrants more connection. Sometimes that connection is beautiful, and if you can't be present with it, it takes you out of the experience. As an adult, you now get to make a conscious choice to reconnect with yourself and not make your parents responsible for that. Because at some point on the healing journey, you do have to, or on the adult journey, there is healthy separation. You do eventually have to break off from your parents and your family and be your own person. But if you never got that initial connection in the first place, you may be unconsciously trying to stay close with your family through other things that may not be good or healthy for you, just so you can belong and get that need met. So like, for example, if your parent is obsessed with dieting and getting steps in, and that doesn't align for you, but every time that you're around them, you start to kind of mold yourself to those conversations, or you start to kind of involve yourself in that energy because you don't really know any other way to connect with them. That's going against yourself just for your deep need for connection. And the reason that you're feeling things so deeply in that is because you need to belong so deeply. The healthy way to go about feeling things deeply is do the healing work that you need to do within fulfilling yourself and not making your parents responsible for that healing, so that you can attract healthy relationships of all kind and learn to discern what energy or emotions are yours versus what you feel enmeshed with just because you have this deep need for belonging. So when someone says to me they're a deep feeler, what I actually want to ask them is, what happened in your family, in your childhood home growing up? What possibility you watched what happened in your family system emotionally or physically and had some really big feelings about it, and you couldn't speak up or say anything about the situation? How has that manifested in your life today? Do you keep yourself quiet? Did you go the opposite way and become super opinionated, and it's like rubbing up against your family dynamic? It's hard when talking about this stuff with family constellation therapy, because I think a lot of people want me to like give them a black and white algorithm of like, if you're like this, then you're like this. And like with some things that works, but a lot of the times it's very nuanced. So that's why I speak really generally with my podcast episodes, because I'm not trying to like diagnose people. I'm not diagnosing people in this podcast at all, ever. I'm literally just sharing information, and it's up to you to decide if you feel that that resonates for you or if it doesn't. Sometimes being empathetic can also show up as being hypervigilant, since being empathetic is actually a largely cerebral and intellectual experience. There is a part of your inner child that is still trying to use your brain in your adult life to figure out your environment and measure if you're safe, secure, or free to be in your feelings. So if you're like, I'm really empathetic, I can walk into a room and feel people's emotions, you're actually just looking for safety, and you're intellectualizing and analyzing through your mind people's behaviors, people's thoughts, the way they say something, the tone of their voice. You're really just looking for, am I safe to be in connection? Because kids don't have logic to make sense of what's happening in their environment, they will look to and express their feelings to try to navigate a difficult situation. So a lot of times explosive emotions, people will be like, I don't know why my kid's so explosive. Well, what are they holding on to? What are they not able to make sense of in their environment? Are they holding on to something that they saw in their childhood? And you may have poo-pooed it as like not a big deal, but like maybe to the child, those feelings are big for them, and they're trying to navigate a difficult internal situation that they don't have the words to express. And so when those feelings aren't honored or allowed to be expressed, or they're shut down by someone through emotional, physical, any kind of abuse, it can be shut down and stored or suppressed in the body. And then we experience like a lifelong dysregulation that carries with us into adulthood. If you were a child who experienced feelings that weren't honored or allowed to be expressed, and you learn to shut them down, how it displays itself in adulthood can range from moodiness, silent expectations that you have for people that usually lead to resentment, storing your emotions down, and then they like lash out somehow and they don't really make sense, or they come out in like a self-sabotaging way. It can be also through anger. you can either run away from the issues and become more avoidant, or you can run more anxious and more nervous. It just kind of depends on your environment and the way that you were raised and the things that you felt. There's a lot more, but these are the ones that we tend to focus on the most, or the more obvious ones to kind of reach for. And I feel that the depth at which you feel does not always equal the expression of it. Meaning, just because someone doesn't express their emotions openly doesn't mean that they don't feel them deeply. People's process of displaying emotions is largely reliant on what it was like growing up in their environment and how the pattern of behavior has played out in the remainder of their life. So, for example, in Family Constellation Therapy, which I'll abbreviate as FCT today for the episode, we are navigating the journey between empathy and compassion. We're using a lot of empathy in the beginning of a session to try to understand the patterns that are keeping people blocked, or like the traumas that happened, or the dynamics between you and your parent, and how that may have been a repeated pattern from your parent and their parent, and maybe their parent and their parent. Like, we're trying to see how far back we can go with the knowledge that we have to see if there's any patterns that are keeping everyone stuck. And then when we open the morphogenic field and we stand on the papers in the energy field to stand in our family's energy and shoes, we are then invited into an experience of compassion. So it's like empathy is the first part of that experience, but compassion comes later. Empathy allows us the permission to depersonalize what happened to us, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, and what hurt us and who hurt us. But compassion pulls us so much deeper into the heart and allows us to put on more of a loving lens in the way that we interact with our family, or even think about them if we're estranged. And even if we are estranged, which is a boundary we may feel empowered to take for our safety, emotionally or physically, at any time with our families, or just even maybe some separation with them for a while, finding that peace inside of you through empathy and compassion can be extremely liberating. Trust me when I say that in that is freedom. When you find that empathy and compassion, you find a lightness and a peace where the pain isn't our identity anymore, or the thing that they did to us isn't holding us back. It's something that happened to us. It becomes a part of our story. It's shifted our life journey, but we can always call back our own power and truth and freedom. And one way to do that is through empathy and compassion. Those are like the easiest things to reach for. Okay, first I'm going to understand what happened to my family. And then by understanding what happened to them, maybe if I step into their shoes in this energy field and I really actually get a glimpse, a peek into a moment in time in their experience, maybe compassion is the next step. And when we're entering a deeper relationship with a energy like compassion, it's easy to have resistance, because honestly, the vulnerability of being that heart-centered requires us to open ourselves. And that openness can be really scary, because I think many people don't allow themselves to get deeper into compassion in that openness, out of the fear that if they were to fully embrace that family member's experience and embrace those feelings, or even that family member, it would mean that they would be potentially excusing any behavior or words that have been exchanged between you and that person. And that just isn't the case. My thought is having compassion for someone only gives us permission to experience more freedom. Like, that is the gateway to ultimate freedom, is compassion. Because if we stay away from that, if we move away from being compassionate with others, we are more of a prisoner to the things that happen to us, because we're literally just carrying that anger, their pain, the thing that they did us. We're carrying it on, that thing that they did to us, we're carrying it on our back, and we're literally saying, I'm going to carry this too. This is now mine. But it's not. It's really, really, really not. And I think that that's one of the coolest things I see with Family Constellation Therapy, which is the healing modality that I help others with and guide others through. If you're new to the podcast, the number one thing that I hear after people's sessions is, I'm not easily triggered by my parent anymore. That thing that they did to me, it doesn't affect me the way that it used to, because I realized it wasn't about me. So while empathy helps us to depersonalize people's actions, compassion allows us to be free from them in a much more profound way. So even though they're separate and they're different, there's a journey between the two of them that's kind of this transformational unfolding. I've definitely experienced resistance and a bit of push and pull with having compassion for certain people in my life and my family. You know, at different times, different situations, I've wanted to be very closed off and push people out, and like spiral in my thoughts of like how horrible I feel and how horrible they may be to me in that moment. But I've noticed that if I'm struggling with anger and anger is taking me out of my compassion, there's so much more to address within that situation and within myself. It's about getting curious about what they may be going through and how much it has nothing to do with me. I was recently in a situation with someone where someone broke my trust and lied to me. And I felt so betrayed because I had put so much love and trust into this relationship. And I held on to my anger for a long time with this person, months. And I was just like basically making myself a victim to what they did. And I guess you could look at it in the perspective that I was a victim for a moment in time with what they did, because they literally detonated a bomb with someone else. And then I got caught in the middle of it. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? I don't understand what I did. Now I see things from a different perspective, and I understand that it was actually a huge misunderstanding. And the only way that I was able to break through my anger and my resentment and see things from a different perspective was when I tried putting myself in that person's shoes that I felt betrayed me. And I was like, why would they do something like that? I'm going to understand why. Oh, okay. Starting to get curious about who's involved in this situation. Maybe they feel really loyal to those people. Maybe they feel that they need to be protective. Maybe they're looking to feel like they belong. Like all these things went through my head. And when I was able to realize that, I dropped it. And I texted that person and I was like, I'm not going to hold this any longer. I'm definitely not the kind of person that's going to force myself to feel something I'm not ready to feel. I needed those few months to go through the what the fuck? Why would they do this? This is pissing me off. Why isn't anyone talking about this? Why didn't anyone apologize to me? And feeling like, going through a lot of those emotions. And then when I was ready, I pursued the path of I'm going to let this go. And I think that's really a part of the victim journey as well, is like, yes, you may be a victim to something, but at any moment in time, you can be the hero of your own story. You don't have to be a victim to something forever. In fact, staying in that victim energy actually is low vibrational and keeps you stuck in the identity of that trauma or that thing that happened, rather than you basically realizing I'm much more powerful than the situation. I can do what I need to do to heal from it, but I can also move forward. I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast episode, you're ready to embrace empathy and compassion to some extent. So if any of this feels uncomfortable or you're resistant to any of this, but you're listening, lean into that resistance. There might be something really, really interesting in this for you. But that constant push and pull, healing your relationship with someone in your life, is actually quite normal, because it's really just the ego's resistance and trying to keep us safe. That's it. So just to recap on everything that we've been saying so far about empathy and compassion, because we're going to switch gears for a second. Empathy says, I understand where this comes from. I understand why this person did what they did. In my situation, I understand this person was looking for belonging, loyalty, and they were looking for love. Compassion says, I embrace this person in their fear. And now notice the resistance you have against that. Notice that resistance. Dr. Brian Weiss talks about Christ, and I work deeply with Christ consciousness. I had a really horrible relationship with Jesus most of my life. I always gravitated towards Mother Mary. Jesus just felt untouchable to me. I didn't really understand how he would die on a cross for people's sins. I'm like, why would anybody do that? That's literally the silliest thing. How does that apply to me? I just had like a weird relationship with Jesus. As I got older, Spirit and my guides started leaning me into Christ consciousness and showing me a lot of synchronicities around how to incorporate Christ consciousness into my work, into my life. And now I have a great relationship with Jesus. He's like a brother to me. I call on him whenever I need a brotherly love and or advice or guidance, and he always comes in, always, all the time. So Jesus, when he was alive on this earth and he was preaching his teachings and he was sharing with others his wisdom, his knowledge, his downloads, and I'm going to take a much more new age spiritual approach to Jesus in this sense. But I think you can take these words and apply them in a more religious context if that vibes with you. But Jesus shared his healing powers, his gifts with the world. And he had so many naysayers and he had so many people that literally called him a phony and a fake. I mean, they killed him for it. Even until the last day, his compassion was so great that not only did he understand where this stuff was coming from with other people, but he embraced them even in that. He embraced people even in their fear, even in their judgment, even in their criticism. And so that's why Christ consciousness is all about forgiveness, love, compassion, and understanding. That is literally Christ consciousness because Jesus was the greatest embodiment of people are fearful and I'm still going to embrace them for it. Embracing doesn't always mean love. Embracing doesn't always mean being buddy-buddy with people. Embracing is literally just opening yourself up to witnessing somebody in their fear and then holding them in that experience without any judgment. Like somebody who's deeply fearful is somebody who is still navigating their inner world and how the things that have happened to them are literally running their entire life. Usually people who are in deep fear or judgment or criticism struggle with insecurity. So if someone insecure came to you and you were only embodying compassion and love and empathy, you would know that somebody who's insecure really just needs someone to hold them. People who are insecure are pushed back a lot in society. Oh, you're so insecure. I'm going to push you away. I don't need insecure energy around me. But insecure people really just need, those are the people that need to be loved the most. They're the people that need to be embraced the most. So that is an example of how we can use Christ consciousness or even the story of Jesus to embrace people in their judgment and their fear. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to end there because we went through so many different things today. If you have any questions about what came up on this episode today, DM me on Instagram, comment on TikTok, let me know. I am happy to elaborate on everything that I spoke about this week. And don't forget, at the end of every single month, I give away a free family constellation therapy session to somebody who rates, subscribes, and reviews my podcast. If you can't review it on Spotify, go leave me a comment on YouTube and screenshot that and send it to me on Instagram. And I will put your name on the list to win a free 2-hour session with me. This work is incredible, you guys. It is so life-changing and transformative, and it's like nuts in the best way. Even if you don't consider yourself spiritual, but you're really called to this, just enter your name in. If it's meant to be, it will be. So with that, thank you for joining me on another week, sending you all of my love, and I will see you next week on next week's episode.